South Whitehall Township Zoning Hearing Board is now in session. The board met in executive session. No votes were taken, no decisions were made. This evening, we have the appeal, what would be a request from Lanston Equities in that matter for a reconsideration of the decision that was made at the November 22nd hearing. And that was that we had denied a continuance at that time. So at this point in time, I'm going to ask the board to take a vote on whether we should continue that, should we have a reconsideration of that decision to have another meeting in regard to that or not. So all those in favor of having a second meeting to do reconsideration over the Lanston request indicate with the usual sign. All those not in favor indicate with the usual sign. Denied.
That was unanimous.
Okay. All right, now we'll go forward in terms of the request here of the Crackersburg Racquetball LP. The docket numbers, zoning hearing board number 2021-06, with a request. At this point in time, the request is regarding the parking, but I think there are a lot of other questions that have to be resolved before we go forward just on the parking. So at this point in time, anyway, are there any interested parties or objectors here? I see none. Okay. You'd like to go ahead, sir. Identify yourself and.
Thank you. I'm John Van Leuveney. I'm an attorney with Eastburn and Gray in Doylestown. I'm representing the applicants tonight. And if you'd like, I'd be happy to give you kind of a brief roadmap as to where we're going. We have three witnesses.
Would you say your name again, because I didn't catch it?
I'm sorry, Van Leuveney, V as in Victor,
Yeah.
A-N-L-U, V as in Victor, A-N-E-E. It's also on the front cover of the exhibit book I handed out tonight.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, go ahead. You can present your cases every way you want.
All right, well, I'd be happy to answer questions that you had to start with, but essentially, we have three witnesses tonight. One is Abe Attia, who will identify himself as the principal in all of the entities who are listed as owners of an interest in the real estate that's the subject of this application. Mr. Attia will give you some background and explain what it is that he is intending to do with the development or the use of the remaining portions of the property that have not been developed. Most of the property is not subject to this development. The only subject of the newer proposal is the remaining part of the West End Racket Swim and Fitness Club. That's all we're really talking about tonight. And as a result of the conversations between Mr. Attia and his engineer, Bill Erdman, and Ms. Harrier, it was suggested that Mr. Attia pursue this as a coordinated development. The ordinance permits that development in this, the type of development in this district. And what it really is an umbrella that allows you to bring in 1, 2, 3 or more permitted uses under one umbrella. If you qualify, if the uses are all permitted, the ordinance then requires that the parking be the cumulative parking requirement applicable to all of the uses that comprise the coordinated development. It then further provides that in this development, because it comprises more than 75,000 square feet, is entitled to a 15% reduction in that cumulative parking requirement. So what we're going to do tonight with Abe first is to give some background. I'm sure most of you probably know the property and know what used to be there and probably have some familiarity with the West End Fitness Club. But we're going to summarize that on the record. Abe will tell you about what he's already done, as he's been in front of this board on a number of occasions, I know, most recently with respect to use, back in 2016 when his people came before you with an application for a special exception for a retirement community on the property. And he's then established 2 phases of that and has obtained approval for a 3rd phase. He'll take you briefly through that. From that point, then, we'll move on. Our architect, Gene Berg, will be our second witness. Gene will take you through some floor plans and explain how the square footage allocations work. And then the 3rd witness will be Bill Erdman, and Bill will take us through some of the history of the property so you can see how we got there. We're not going to dwell on that, but take us up through the present time and also offer some testimony with respect to parking demand. What we intend to show you, because the ordinance, your ordinance under the parking section states that the zoning hearing board may grant a variance where the applicant can demonstrate to its satisfaction that the ordinance's strict application may require more parking than is anticipated. We're going to show you that we believe that there is actually, at least if you follow ITE parking criteria and the actual parking demand for the facilities that Mr. Attia has developed, we believe that there will be adequate parking once he's developed the 90 spaces that he's required to develop in connection with the Phase 4, the senior housing project that he intends to build. It's called Phase 4 of the retirement community. He does not intend to build Phases 2 and 3 of the retirement community, and we'll show you that on the plans. That's the area of the fitness club that he proposes to use as a restaurant and a fitness center. So when we're finished, we hope we'll be able to convince you that we'll have enough parking, but if there isn't, we propose reserve parking, which is again in accordance with your ordinance, in an amount equal to the total amount of parking spaces that your zoning officer has suggested would be required under strict application of the ordinance. And we have an email from Ms. Harrier that will be an exhibit to show you how she envisioned this application being presented. That's where we're going. We're going to essentially give you a high and a low, and we hope that you can see that if Mr. Attia is willing to construct the reserve parking, if the township determines it's necessary, that you'll allow him to proceed and grant the variance as you have the discretion to grant under the ordinance.
Let's have any parties that are going to testify, please stand and raise your right hand, and you'll swear them in. All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Van Louvenet, why don't you present your case?
I will do that. Thank you, sir. The Exhibit 1, I've just marked these, and with your permission. Exhibit 1 was addendum number 1 to our application. I assume the application will be marked as an exhibit, but as a board exhibit, but I didn't include it because I assumed that it would already be marked, pre-marked. But I would like to make sure that the application is a part of the record.
I'm sorry, you're saying the application, the zoning appeal application that was filed?
Yes.
That'd be part of the record.
That's what I assumed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that was submitted to the township will be part of the record.
I assumed that. The addendum number 1 I submitted only for clarification because there are a number of owners there, and I wanted to explain exhibit number 1. You see there in the left side it says parcel number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then under 6 there are units 1 through 9. The explanation for that, exhibit number 2 shows the 6 parcels that we identified on addendum number 1. And then the third exhibit is a recorded condominium plan that ties all of these 9 parcels together. That's why we set the exhibit number 1 up the way we did. Some of these properties are additional real estate, but the bulk of the units are located in the area of the old West End Fitness Center. So that's why we have so many applicants. As simple as that. We've given you the acreages and the dates of acquisition and the parcel numbers on addendum number 1. Just by way of explanation before I ask Mr. Attia a couple of questions about that. First exhibit behind tab number 1. What I said is addendum number 1 to the zoning hearing board application, but it would just be simpler, so we've included it here. All right. And with that, Mr. Attia, would you please state your name and business address? Push it a little closer, Abe, maybe.
Should I repeat? Abraham Richard Attia, 1177 6th Street, Whitehall, PA is our business office.
What's the nature of your business, Mr. Attia?
More real estate development and personal care homes is our primary business.
Okay. Now, I put next to you there, Abe, a copy of the application, of the exhibits, rather. So would you take a look, please, behind tab 1 at addendum number 1, which is the owner's chart. There are a number of entities that are identified there: Crackers Port Racquetball, Parkland Property LLC, Avra Development 23 LP, Center and Dewberry Partners LP, Basin Exchange LP, and I think that's probably it. In any event, you signed the application on behalf of each of these entities, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And with respect to each of those entities, are you in an ownership position with respect to each, and are you authorized to sign on their behalf?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And are you familiar with all of the properties that are involved in this application?
I am, yes.
Okay. Now, the majority, Mr. T, are the majority of the improvements currently located on the property that's known as 4636 Crackersport Road?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And the chart indicates that it was purchased by Crackersport Racquetball in 2015. At the time the property was purchased, can you describe the improvements that were located on that plan or on the property?
Yes, sir. When I bought the site, there was, when I had it under agreement, it was the full site, and there were 4 tennis courts the roof was caved in at that time. And when I walked in, there was also sprinkler damage. And so I saw it when it collapsed and sprinkler broke, and the bank owned it. So I went in there and toured the whole site and said, it's a beautiful site. And, but that's the second time I saw it. The first time I saw it, I have to my daughter played district final tennis there, okay, Moravian Academy. My daughter Priya. I saw it before it collapsed. I walked through it, and they said it was for sale at that time. So I saw it, before the snowstorm collapsed, and I saw it afterwards when it collapsed. And so when I purchased it, the 4 tennis courts, they removed all the debris, okay, and there were the existing foundations there. And the existing fitness club was fully loaded with gym equipment. It was operational, a fitness club. There was a real big fitness room. One of the sport courts was operational, and the big fitness room, which is the first gym to the left, had raised floors, and all the cardiovascular equipment was on both sides of that fitness room, loaded up with gym equipment. And on that floor, there were rubber mats, and that was loaded with the real heavyweight gym equipment and with TV screens. So I bought it as an existing fitness club. It was functional and operational. And the courts, there were 4 tennis courts at that time. There was the tennis straps on them. But, and then there was squash and racquetball. And then upstairs on the deck, there was also some fitness and equipment gym up there. And then the bar, the restaurant, snack bar, that's all existing. That was all in there. So, and then the daycare in there, there was an existing daycare in the one-story building in there. So it was a pre-existing fitness club, and it was, that's how I bought it.
All right. Would you turn, please, Mr. T, if you would, to Exhibit 4. This is a recorded plan. The recording information is on the plan. This is the overall land development plan for the racquetball, for the West End Fitness Club. Mr. T, do you have that in front of you?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, at the time you purchased the property, let's start at the top. It looks like there are 11 outdoor tennis courts. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Are those tennis courts still on the property?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Below the tennis courts, there's we'll call it a square that's labeled existing indoor athletic facility. Now, is that the building that you were essentially describing when you went through your testimony as to what was there when you acquired the property?
Yes, sir. And if I could add, I didn't go outside. I told you indoor. There was if I could go back on my.
Well, let me just lead you through it. I think
Okay,
we
go
can do
ahead.
the same thing.
Yeah, okay.
All right? You talked about an area that had collapsed, tennis courts had collapsed.
Yep.
Is that the area that's immediately, as we look at this exhibit, to the left of what's labeled existing indoor athletic facility?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, below that rectangle is something that was labeled existing basketball court. Was that there when you acquired the property?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And to the right of the basketball court, there is something labeled existing pool. Was the pool there when you acquired the property?
Yes, the pool was there, and then that little circle was a baby pool too. There was a little.
Okay,
Baby.
all right. And there's also shows parking facilities all the way to the right of the existing athletic facility. Was that parking lot there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Now, in 2015, and just by way of history, Crackersport Racquetball made an application to establish a drug and alcohol treatment facility on this property. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And that application, the special exception application, was approved, but you elected not to proceed with that application. Is that correct?
Yes, we chose elderly housing over drug treatment at that particular time, and it seemed a good decision. And we're still happy with the senior
Good.
housing.
All right. And in 2016, then Crackersport Racquetball came back to this board for a special exception to use the property for a retirement facility. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I have attached a copy of the decision and order of this board in ZHB 2016-13 as exhibit number 5. Now, Mr. T, in that decision, if you take a look at that decision, on pages 2 and 3, there's a description of what your witnesses told the board you intended to do. It describes phase 1 as being the construction of a new one-story building on the foundation, which existed on the property, which once housed tennis courts and was removed when the roof collapsed. You with me?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct. Yep.
Did you build that project?
Yes, we did.
You did build what's called phase 1. Okay. Phase 2 and phase 3, as it was described at that time, were a description of developing the remaining portions of the building into two phases. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. You did not and have not proceeded with those 2 phases, have you?
No, sir.
Okay. And does the application, the primary focus of the parking variances we're asking for tonight, actually applies to your proposed use of those areas of the building? Am I correct?
Yes.
All right.
Quick question.
Yes.
Is phase 1A and 1B what you're speaking of, or is,
We're going to get there next.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to get there. Mr. Atiyev, there's references to phases 1A and phase 1B. There was no reference to 1A and 1B in the decision. You did you first built over the building over the area where the 4 tennis courts were, under the collapsed building. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did you subsequently obtain waiver of land development approval to build what you called phase 1B?
We did, and we realized we didn't have memory care, which we had personal care was in the first one. So we went to put a land development application in to replace the basketball courts and to add on 20 units for a specific memory care facility when our residents start to have memory issues, they have a location, they move into a secured memory care. So that was phase 1A, phase 1B. The B section was an addition that we added in replacement of the basketball courts, yes.
All right, and while we're on it, what is the total number, or first of all, are all the units in 1A and 1B assisted living units?
Yes, but licensed personal care, yes.
All right, and how many rooms are there total?
There's 59 total.
Okay. And again, since the subject tonight generally is parking, at that time, when you got approval to do phases 1A and subsequently phase B, the fitness club was not being actively utilized. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So at the time you did those phases, was that the only active use of the property?
Yeah, it's like we have 15 acres and we have, 60 rooms and there's all this parking and like, if I drove by there just now, there's 12 parking cars in the parking lot, 12. We have 61 residents in the building right now, and there's only 12 cars, so it's underutilized, yes.
All right. Rather than proceed to develop phases 2 and 3, in other words, the remaining part of the building as a retirement community, Mr. Tia, did you subsequently propose to develop another area of this property as a senior housing project, senior?
Yes, sir.
And what area of the property was that?
Where the 11 tennis courts are outdoor, we realize that there's big demand for independent living in South Whitehall Township. There hasn't been a new one built, except the most recent one that Luthercrest built. There hasn't been independent living, a new building for 25 years in the township. I was like, wow. So we chose to build, get approved for a 4-story independent living building, 84 units. And we thought, wow, what better use than have the amenities next door for the independent livings. They need, exercise room, they need workout, longevity sort of thing. So we thought it would be perfect to build the independent living, that we got all the approvals in place. We're about to record the plans. And those 84 residents in there need amenities. I'm thinking, I'm not going to tear down all these courts and put personal care in there when the independent living residents, the 84 people, are going to be able to walk to all these great things, having pickleball exercise. And so we sort of reversed around and we got phase 4 approved, and we're not going to build phase 2 and phase 3 because they're perfect amenities for our independent living customers and our personal care customers that are actually attached to the building. So
Okay.
that's...
So this will be senior independent living, is that correct?
Yeah, the new building, senior independent living on the existing 11 tennis courts, yeah.
And Mr. Tiu, again, and we'll have the documentation for the board, but I'll introduce that through Mr. Erdman. You obtained a waiver of land development approval to develop that plan, is that correct?
We went through full land development on the 84 units. Oh,
All
yeah,
right,
planning commission, board of
fine.
supervisors, we went through the whole permitting process. Yeah, it was a full-blown approval. We didn't need zoning relief because it's permitted, but it was a good plan when it's all engineered, ready to be recorded.
Yeah. Mr. T, if you turn to Exhibit 6, please. Does that show the, sorry about that. Does Exhibit 6, which is also part of what was submitted to with the application to show the proposed locations of reserved parking, if it became necessary to build them, that shows phase 4 in schematic, doesn't it?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now, you also told us about the location of phase 1B. That shows on this plan also, doesn't it?
It does.
And what you described as phase 1A also shows on the plan.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So right now, the available parking is limited to the original parking lot, which was part of the West End fitness plan. When you build phase 4, there will be an additional parking lot constructed. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And will that have 90 spaces in it, 90 new spaces?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the application indicates that you intend to develop a restaurant within the I'll call it the fitness center building, and also to operate as a fitness club within that building. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, no new construction, no exterior construction is proposed, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Everything is intended to be limited to the existing building.
Adaptive reuse,
Okay.
yes.
So the uses that are proposed for this coordinated development all essentially will be within the parameters of the area that was used by the fitness club previously, correct?
Yes.
Comprised of the assisted living, the senior independent living, a restaurant, and a fitness club.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. Sure.
I'm confused about one thing. Where will the fitness center be?
We're going to get there right now. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Fitness center is going to be in the fitness center. Is that right, Abe?
Yes. It's in the existing fitness club. We'll have an exhibit for you coming up. You'll be able to see it with the.
We have floor plans coming with the next witness, too.
Yeah,
right?
the
I'll wait and watch. Okay.
But the fitness club is going to be within the building that was used as a fitness club. Is that right?
Sir, yeah, yes, no changes.
Okay. And
And where will the fitness club be for the residents?
They're going to share it. They're going to use it.
They're
The
going to share it
resident-
with people who come from the outside?
Yes. It's shared.
I don't think that meets the zoning code.
It does. That's why we're here.
I don't think it does.
Well,
Well, we'll go forward.
I understand.
all right. First of all, Mr. Attia, what improvements would you need to make inside in order to use that?
Well, it's, the inside is already fit out as a fitness club. We're putting in new windows in, it's because it's real dark and gloomy in there now. It's dark. And we demoed a couple interior walls. We're gonna convert the old fitness club floors. We're gonna rip out the flooring on them and make that a sport court, okay, in one of the fitness courts. And then we're actually downsizing. The old fitness courts were 8,000 square feet, and the new fitness is only gonna be like 3,000 square feet because the demand, our age group that we're looking to target, the age 55 and up, are more court-related than they are fitness. They're not gonna go in there and lift weights and do exercises on a treadmill for an hour or two, but they'll play pickleball or they'll play volleyball. It's like this is more sport court-related club than it's gonna be a big fitness club. So we reduced the size of our fitness square footage down to 3,000 instead of 8,000.
Okay.
And then we're gonna have basically 6 sport courts now instead of 5 that were previous. Okay, so it's a matter of being able, and then everything else, the locker rooms, everything's all staying the same. And then the old daycare that's in there, the daycare is gonna be converted, which it already has been approved to put a restaurant in there, and that's already been licensed and approved.
Right. So this, make sure we're clear here. The fitness club that you intend to operate is not a part of your retirement community. It's a new use as you propose it. Is that correct?
No, it's a new use. It's an existing use that
Right.
that could serve Parkland Manor residents for an hour, or it could serve residents from Whitehall Manor, Saucon Valley Manor, Bethel Manor are going to have free memberships to come here and work out. And then the members, the POAs, the members of the families could have a discounted membership because their mom and dad can work out there for free. So there's going to be a discounted scenario for all the manors of the valley. You know, we have 400 residents, and they all have POAs, you know, power of attorney. So it is a matter of we're going to be able to. This is going to be more of a longevity fitness club it is going to serve our manors, but it's going to serve the family members. It's going to serve people in the community in South Whitehall Township that are looking to come in and use the sport courts primarily and the fitness.
I have a quick question about the sports courts for retired people.
Sure.
That doesn't seem consistent with, I mean, I'm retired.
Sure.
I use a treadmill or I use a bike much more than I would use a court.
Of course.
And I'm in pretty good shape.
You're young, you know, it's a,
Well, I'm 77, I'm not young. So
Well-
I'm just wondering, all these courts are really not for the residents, but they're for people from the outside.
No, pickleball is, yeah, well, we only have 60 residents in Parkland Manor, okay? But when we build the independent living, the 84, there's gonna be 84, okay? You can't support a fitness club with just 60 residents that are living in a facility. It's financially not feasible. It's like you can't have all this space for 60 people that are personal care residents. But you start to get 84 independent living in there. You get some people from South Whitehall Township joining longevity, fitness, longevity. And pickleball's a huge trend right now, okay? And the walking paths, and there's things that are active adult related that they starting to use sport courts. There's a big trend nationally going on all over for these type of facilities. And the other thing is, all the fitness clubs that are in South Whitehall, okay, they're all geared towards the muscle and working out. None of them have courts to exercise in the wintertime. Where do you walk? Indoor walking path. You could go in, it's like, there's nowhere to go in the winter. South Whitehall doesn't even have a community center to work out in. It's like, what? We'll have a discounted membership for South Whitehall Township. If you're a member, a resident, and, age 55 and up, we're targeting that upper crowd. Young kids aren't going to come here and work out. I mean, it's going to be more geared towards longevity, active adult people that want to stay young and healthy. That's our goal to operate this facility. We don't want to compete with all the fitness clubs that are around here. We're not in that business. We want to gear it towards our market. And the longer our residents live, the healthier we are, the better people will pay rent and stay in our communities. We want them to exercise and live long. It's healthy. That's our goal.
Abe, you mentioned a restaurant. Could you explain your concept?
Restaurant's gonna be serving most of our people that come in at the facilities here and exercise and work out and be able to have lunch or have a light dinner afterwards on a Friday night and work out. It's small. It's, I think, 3,600 square feet. It's
A little bigger than that, but Gene will give us the square footage.
It's going to serve the lunch, dinner crowd, the people that come in and work out. We're going to try and be health conscious sort of restaurant that's going to serve healthy foods. I don't know if you guys know about the grid. There's in Boston, what's the name of that place in Boston? The Salad Works, is it? Yeah, but there's good restaurants that serve healthy food. We're looking to bring good, healthy food into our restaurant. It's small, but it's just more of a convenience to our members can work out and have a good, healthy meal and then go home.
And you propose to be open till 2 in the morning?
Well, no, it's not, we don't propose to be open till 2, but if it's a Friday night.
Well, I didn't make that up. I think that's what your application said.
Well, we do. We want to be open till 2 o'clock. If it's a Friday night, right? And our residents, we have 84 independent living there, and their kids come in from Florida to visit them or something, and the bar is open, the bar and restaurant's open at 2 o'clock. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a restaurant that can stay open late on a Friday night. If there's a good football game. One bad thing about retirement communities in Lehigh Valley, none of them have a bar and restaurant within, okay? It's a death sentence when you tell somebody, go into your room and we're gonna cook you 3 meals a day, and they can't have a drink, okay? They can't choose their own meals. I mean, it's like they can't order things. Like, we have 5 facilities, and it's depressing. Once you're in there, you can't drink beer and you can't go grab a beer. Our residents now in their drink, they love to drink. Then we have to serve them. But here they could go to a bar and actually drink,
So don't say that they don't occur, because it does occur.
What was that again?
Sounds like more like you're having a restaurant facility that you'd like to put in under the guise of your retirement.
Well, it's a permitted
But you
use.
go ahead and present your case.
Yeah. But a restaurant is a permitted use in that zone. So whether I serve my residents or serve the neighborhood is legal. I mean, it's permitted.
If it meets the requirements of a residential facility for skilled nursing and nursing home, et cetera,
But it does.
not a separate thing. but go ahead.
Well, the reason we're proposing the coordinated development is because you can bring different uses in. It does not have to be a part of the retirement community. Any other permitted use can be established in connection with the retirement community. We can establish a restaurant. In our opinion, we have the right to continue to operate a fitness club. We have 3 different
You're
uses.
going to have a separate restaurant for your residents?
We do, yes. We have a separate dining area for the residents, yes. And we have a separate kitchen that's going to cook for the residents there, yes.
You know, if I could just interrupt, I think part of the confusion here that I think the board, and certainly myself as well, is having is that there are certain requirements in the zoning ordinance for a retirement community. And one of those is that it specifically says it has to include communal dining, recreation, open space. And then it goes on further with the additional regulations part, and it talks about if you have ancillary low-intensity recreation, which is what your appeal application says you're coming in under, it says it's limited to serving the residents of the retirement facility and their guests. And also, back in the retirement facility section, it's talking about if you have ancillary facilities, such as ancillary retail sales of food and drugs, it says it could be provided, may also be provided specifically for the use of the residents of the complex. I think part of the confusion that your appeal application created, hopefully you can straighten this out, is where does your retirement facility exist, and then where are and what are the facilities for the retirement facility specifically, as opposed to what you're proposing as a part of the coordinated development, a restaurant that's open to the general public, and a recreation facility that's open to the general public. Sounds to me like you're talking about overlap, and this ordinance, where it's dealing with retirement facilities, is talking about it being specifically serving the residents and their guests. And it sounds to me like you're overlapping or you're double using, and I think we need clarification. So if you can direct yourself to that, I think that's very key here if I'm not misspeaking for the board.
No, that's it.
Yep. Well, Mr. Berg has the floor plans. We were going to take you through them, so he will be the next witness. I mean, that's...
All right, so we hope to get clarification, but that's where I think you need to go.
I understand that. He's the next witness. I wanted Mr. Attia to give you his overview before we put the experts on.
If I could speak, that when we opened Phase 1 and Phase 1B, we complied with the ordinance. We're up and operational with that building by itself, so you understand that. This building next door that it's attached to is totally separate, and we got licensed, operated, we got approvals from the state, we got approvals from the township, and it was permitted, and by this building next door is separate from the application of the personal care license. This is separate, and even though it's connected, and our personal care residents may use it, it's totally separate use. It's on a 15-acre campus that they're 2 separate ownership parcels, 2 separate uses. So we got permits, we're up and open, we're 95% occupied on the personal care side, and it's fine. It's a personal care home within the retirement zone. It's permitted.
Well, we're hoping that you'll show the board and myself where those facilities are for the residents, specifically the recreation, the open space, versus what you're now saying is to be part of the coordinated development of the fitness and recreation facilities and the restaurant. We're anxious to hear that.
Of course.
All right, well, let me go back a little bit too. Mr. Attia, when you got approval for Phase 1A and Phase 1B, were there any conditions imposed with respect to recreation that you can recall?
The recreation that we have is within that, inside there's a big common area in there that they have indoor recreation for that unit. It's self-contained within the open space on the inside.
And where did the folks get their food?
The food it's brought in and it's heated, and we have a small heating kitchen in there. It's brought in from one of the other manors. It's served licensed, and we heat it and serve it. It's brought in from our other chefs.
So it is self-contained, and that was the basis on which it was permitted, have nothing to do with this, the area that we're talking about tonight.
No, next door was, that's all extra vacant. That was actually proposed to be torn down. You know, we were gonna tear it down in the original approvals. Phase 2 and 3 were tear down. Now, we're not tearing it down, we're using it for fitness club that's gonna be open to the public.
And
I'm
the same,
still a little confused. The recreation or the gyms, the workout rooms, they're not going to be shared by the residents and the outside people.
No, they will be shared, but we have enough indoor recreation space within phase 1 of this facility. Indoor has common area space. The personal care residents can or cannot, they don't need to go next door to work out. They have ample room inside their facility. It's a personal care facility. You know, there's a lot of open space inside. We'll show you on the floor plans. But you don't need 60,000 square foot fitness care center to serve 60 residents that are personal care residents, and 20 of those are memory care residents that really don't leave the facility much. They're stuck inside.
well, more importantly, there was no tie-in between Phase 1A and the main building.
No, the original plans, phase 2, the next door, that was phase 2, and phase 3, that was gonna be torn down. Instead of tearing them down, we're using them for fitness. I mean, there was no commitment to keep that recreation or open space for my personal care business. It was not even in any plan.
And with respect to Phase 4, Mr. Atiyah, which you said you now have an approved plan and you're planning to build it, were there any conditions imposed on Phase 4?
No,
relating
phase
to
4 has its own indoor space, its own indoor dining, and its own indoor kitchen. It was not, this is all an extra. It was not a commitment. Phase 4 has its own internal everything. It's just, this is, being on a fitness campus is a good thing for sales. But we need to open to the public. You can't operate a facility like that.
And maybe you answered this. Is there any recreation, though, that is set aside specifically just for residents, separate, that the public can't access?
In their building, yes. In phase 1A and 1AB, no public can go in there. That's where Mr. Klein's a little confused. We're not letting the public into the personal care building, no.
I never said anything about them going to the personal care building, so don't put words in my mouth.
I'm sorry. What I'm saying is the personal care residents have their own private community, okay? They can choose to go next door to work out. But the people...
What I'm asking is, when you say they can choose to go next door, is to that, when you say next door, is that to the facility that is also open to the public?
Yes.
Okay, do they have, besides that, their own, where the ordinance says, ancillary low-intensity recreation limited to serving the residents of the facility, is there a space set aside just for them, beside the one that's open to the public?
Yes.
Okay.
We have a real big room and that they do everything they want in there. We do exercise in there, workout, yes.
There's machinery and equipment in there for them to use? Is
Yes,
that what
sir,
you're saying?
there is. Oh, yeah, we have exercise equipment, yeah.
And you'll show us that on a document somewhere later on?
We didn't bring floor plans of those phases, I don't think, because they're not really relevant to the application. Those are already permitted, constructed, and not conditioned on anything having to do with this building. So, I mean,
I know we're just
obviously,
dealing
we
with-
could bring them in. I think, obviously, we could bring them in. If you needed a continuance for that purpose, after we go through the rest of the evidence, we'd be happy to bring the floor plans in.
Yeah, I think the board, wants to see that because part of this retirement facility says it's supposed to have recreation and open space. And what I hear you telling us this evening is that the phase 1 and phase 1A, and phase 1B, which are up and running, presumably have the communal dining and they have the recreation. And I think that's what we would like to
Yeah.
hear and see, because we're very confused by what you're proposing.
We apologize for the confusion. We do. We're sorry, but we could clear it up.
Yeah, I will tell you, your zoning appeal application left a lot to be desired in terms of trying to comprehend what it is that you're doing and what you propose to do and how it relates to what was previously approved
Sure.
for a retirement facility.
We could clear it up we have all the time in the world. We'll clear up, ask her all questions, and we have all the exhibits. I have my architect here, I have my civil engineer.
We would have to bring the exhibits in, Abe, for the approved plans. Well, we have the plans, we can show you the plan for Phase 1A and 1B, but not the internal plan. We'd have to get the permit plan that was issued from the township for the permits. We do not have that tonight. What? On 1A and 1B? Okay, I'm sorry, Gene.
Excuse me.
Good.
If you're going to speak, then you have to give your name. We have to know who it is so that the person who's doing the describing can know who's talking. You can't just
Right.
have conversation going on.
I agree with you. Let's, if I might, since we're on this 1A, 1B, and 4, if Mr. Berg thinks he has them, may I call him out of turn to ask him to answer your questions? Would you have any
If you want to
objection?
swear, if you want to have him testify now as your witness, fine.
Well, yeah, he's already been sworn in.
Been sworn in. So are you done with Mr. Attia? Or you want to reserve him for later?
I only have 2 more questions. Let me finish with those
All right.
questions. And I would certainly like to be able to recall him, obviously.
Absolutely, that's fine.
All right. Now, Mr. Attia, this application involves variances with respect to parking. You're aware of that, correct? In preparing the application, did you give your consultants the direction that you would like to present or reserve enough parking that you could meet all of the most ambitious parking calculation that you could come up with under the ordinance? In other words, the highest number of parking spaces that could possibly be required of you is what your reserved parking plan is intended to show. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So give you the most flexibility.
Yeah.
And that plan, the reserved parking plan that was attached, is Exhibit 5, is that, or Exhibit 6, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. That's all, that was the last question I was going to ask.
Okay,
Abe.
that's
All
fine.
right?
I want to clarify one thing.
Sure.
That you said under the original agreement for the zoning docket was, Mr. Tia said that tear down, and under Phase 2 and Phase 3, it says would consist of renovating and converting, not tearing down those buildings. Just, that's in the docket.
I understand, but if I could say that, when the domes have to be torn down, leveled, and then we have concrete pads and we build up. Yeah, it's where you redevelop everything except the concrete floors. And all the domes in Phase 2 and 3 plan, there was a complete tear down of the domes. So they were being torn down. We were going to utilize the footings and foundations just like I did on the ones that collapsed. So it is a tear down, renovating tear down, but those dome structures were not going to be part of Phase 2 and Phase 3. They go completely all ripped out.
Thank you.
Yes,
So I
sir.
think he's just trying to clarify that as part of the approval for your retirement facility, you had testified that Phase 2, and it's reflected in the decision in order, which is your Exhibit 5, that it would consist of renovating and converting 28,638 square feet portion of that existing building into 40 rooms with 2 beds in each room for a total of 80 beds, together with dining areas, lounge areas, activity areas, nurse, medical room stations, and other service areas. And you showed that Phase 2 as depicted and demarked in green highlighting on your Exhibit A3C. So we're just trying to clarify here that you did say you were going to renovate and convert that for those uses, and then Phase 3 would be comparable.
Yeah, renovating is demolition. Those domes are not usable. You can't, those walls and those 40, 50-foot high ceilings are not usable. We were demoing them down. That's renovating is using the existing main entrance coming in and keeping that part of it, but the courts were going to be tore down and demoed for Phase 2 and Phase 3.
Well, that's how it was described at the hearing.
I understand, but I mean, I'm telling you how I do construction. When we,
Well,
But the point is you're changing the use.
I'm not changing the use.
You're changing from a beds to tennis courts.
Correct. But it wasn't, no, it was, we never changed the use. These are existing courts. We're just maintaining and using them. I never changed the use. I never stopped using them. They're tennis courts that are being used.
But what I'm saying is you were approved to use that property as for beds and for assisted living, not tennis courts.
Yeah, but we never followed through with that. We changed back to our original plans, which are sport courts, which they are existing, and we're going to reutilize them. We never demoed them. We never changed anything. We have existing sport courts that we want to utilize now for the public, which is permitted by right and just has some parking deficiencies. We're not changing anything just because we came in and got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 approved, and we changed around and put building 4 independent living on the tennis courts and then demoed phase 2 and phase 3. We're using that as fitness courts that can serve the community and serve our residents. I'm not doing a bad thing here. I'm doing a good thing for my development and my seniors and South Whitehall Township. I'm not causing any harm. It's all goodness.
No one's accusing you of anything. We're just trying to clarify based upon what was the prior testimony at a hearing as to what you proposed to do versus what you're proposing to do now.
I understand.
We're just trying to get clarification as to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, but I'm doing good. I'm developing an old vacant
It sounds
building.
like you're reopening the tennis club.
Yes,
That's what you're really doing.
exactly what we're doing.
Okay.
And that's going to serve the community. It's going to serve it's going to be reopened, and it's going to serve our customers and the residents in South Whitehall. The fitness club is going to reopen. Exactly what we're doing.
Okay. How many tennis courts are there indoors?
Indoor, there are sport courts. There's 5 sport courts, tennis courts, and then there's 1 fitness court.
Okay. I used to be a member there. I just was curious as to how many were left.
It's still there, like existing. Nothing's changed inside.
Okay. All right.
That's what, Abe, just on that same topic. You did, obviously, your people did come in here, request relief to do a retirement community.
Yes.
But the building that's a subject that was originally supposed to be phase 2 and phase 3, you have not touched, have you?
Didn't do a thing to it.
Have you kept the fitness equipment still inside?
Every fitness equipment's all there. The tennis courts and nets are there. Everything, it's still existing. It's never been demolished or anything. It's.
Did you ever intend to give up your right to use this as a fitness club?
No, sir. It was an existing fitness club.
But, excuse me, let me ask a question. If you never intended to give up the right to use it as a fitness club, why did you then propose to have it as senior living?
Because I didn't give up any right until I give that right up. I gave up the rights to the 4 courts that collapsed. I gave those rights up. They collapsed, I gave up the rights, I put personal care. But the other courts, I never gave up the rights because if I came in and got approvals for it, and then I pulled a building permit to build those things, okay, then I started construction on those things, then I gave up the rights for tennis courts. I never did that. I never pulled a permit for phase 2 or phase 3. I did only phase 1 and 1B, and then I'm starting phase 4. If I did that, if I pull a permit for 3 and 4 or 2 and 3, yeah, then you're right. I gave up the rights, but I didn't do that. Never will do that. I'm here just to utilize them, and your zoning officer did a good job saying you need parking, and we're saying we can build parking, but you don't need all this parking. That's why we're here. The use is a permitted use.
Mr. T is not going anywhere. He'll be here if there are further follow-up questions. If you don't mind, I'd like to move on to Mr. Cole. Mr. Berg?
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Dean, I don't think we need the laptop, so why don't you concentrate on testifying instead of...
When I speak about the plan, I will call up the plan on the laptop.
That's fine.
And I'll wiggle the mouse in the area that I want to attract your attention to so that if you look at the screens, you'll see the mouse wiggling around and I'm pointing where I want you to look.
That's good. Okay. Let's start through the questioning, though, Gene, all right? All right. Your name and address, please. Name and business address.
Eugene Berg Jr. I'm a registered architect at Gauck Architects, 1304 Hamilton Street, Allentown, PA 18102.
And how long have you been with Gauck Architects?
For 23 years.
Okay. What are your job responsibilities?
I take projects from start to finish, everything from schematic design, design development, construction documents, construction administration, bidding and negotiation, observations, construction observations, and construction management.
And your educational background, what is that?
I have a 5-year Bachelor of Architecture from Virginia Tech.
Okay. Are you registered professional architect?
Yes, I am.
In what states?
In state of Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
Okay. And just cut this a little short. Behind tab 7, as Exhibit 7, is I think it's like 8 pages. Is that your professional resume, Mr. Berg?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Did you prepare this resume?
Yes, I did.
And is all the information contained in this resume true, correct, accurate information as it relates to your education, employment experience, professional registrations?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'd like to offer Mr. Berg as a professional architect, as an expert. Mr. Berg, you heard Mr. Attia's testimony concerning his involvement with the property. I'll call it the property. That's the subject of this application. Have you also been involved with Mr. Attia in connection with those prior phases of the project?
Yes, I have been.
Okay. What role did you play with respect to the assisted living facility, which we've described preliminarily as phases 1A and 1B?
I was the project architect and I designed the building.
Are you familiar with the floor plans for the building?
Yes, I am.
Did you present plans and work with Mr. Attia in obtaining the waiver of land development that was obtained in order to enable him to proceed with the construction?
I prepared the plans.
Right.
When it came down to site approvals, Abe worked with his own staff, which included Dave Hart. Yes.
Okay. With respect to the floor plans for the phase 1 and 1A, Mr. Berg, Mr. Attia testified that there was recreational area provided for in those facilities.
That is correct.
Okay. And that there were also, he called it a kitchen. I mean, he said meals are brought in, but that there's an area.
A warming kitchen, yes.
A warming kitchen.
I can point those out on the plan right now.
You have a plan for phase 1?
I called it up on the screen so everybody in the whole room is all together at once and we can all see what I'm talking about. So I am presently looking at the sheet which is called A1B, and that is part of the exhibit. Let me just get back up.
Exhibit 16.
Exhibit 16, yes. So I'm scrolling down to the, here we go. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Here you can, at the top of the screen, you can see some wide open empty courts, and that is the edge of the fitness building. Then detached from that,
Hang on just a second.
Okay.
We're on exhibit A16, and which sheet are you looking at? A1D as in dog?
A1B as in boy.
B as in boy, thank
Yes.
you.
The reason why the A1 sheet is divided into an A and a B is because it was so large it wouldn't fit onto the 24 by 36 sheet as, at the scale. So we split it onto two sides so that you could see more detail because it's a very large building, or two buildings. So
what you have on the screen now, what that shows is phase A1 or 1A and 1B, correct?
yeah,
All right.
on the bottom left, the rectangular portion, which I'm rotating the mouse around right now, that is phase 1A. That was built on the footprint of where the vaulted roofs collapsed. That used to be 4 tennis courts underneath that. And that is now rooms A1 through A38. Note that there's a 20A and a 20B, so there are really 39 rooms in there. And I'm going to zoom in on the plan, on the screen. So if you're looking up at the screen rather than on your paper, you'll see what I'm pointing at. You can see down the middle, so you see the rooms around the edges, and you can see that there's lines of toilet, the bathrooms are grouped towards the middle, and all down the middle of the building, there are high ceilings, 18-foot tall ceilings, and you can see on the edge, I'm wiggling the mouse, it says activity area. There's an activity area on the left-hand side. On the far right, there's also an activity area. These measure about 36 feet by 36 feet. They're significant. They're not just small rooms. And then just to the inside of that, you will see it's marked dining area. There are some skylights over that. And that's in this area. I'm wiggling the mouse. And on the right-hand side, there's also a dining area here. And you can see on the edge, these are the warming kitchens. There's one here, and there's one here. And then down the middle, we have some administrative offices. There are some other, some gang toilet rooms in the middle. That's what you're looking at in this floor plan. Here's the main front entrance at the bottom in the center. Here's the front reception desk in the front lobby. So this is all phase 1A, built on the foundations where the vaulted roof of the 4 tennis courts collapsed. Then to the south of that, let me pan this over. This is phase 1B. In fact, they're labeled phase 1A and phase 1B on the plan here. This phase 1B was an addition. It has kind of the zigzagged end to it. And it also has an activity area, which is right down here in the end. I'm wiggling the mouse. And inside of that, it also has its own dining area. And it also has a warming kitchen, which was where I'm wiggling the mouse. It also has its own gang toilet room. And just like phase 1A, all the bedrooms are lined up, on the east and west sides of the building here. You can see the north arrow that is right up above, so you can get oriented. North is to the left as it's on the
So these are all
screen.
bedrooms, and then you have a large area for bathrooms. Is there showers in there too?
Yeah,
Nothing in each room regarding bathrooms and showers?
yes, there are. Yes, every room has its own roll-in shower, its own toilet, and its own lavatory sink, which has knee space that the people in a wheelchair, they're all type A, fully accessible.
Just a quick question, just to clarify. 1B is memory care, correct?
Here.
So those folks are pretty much doing the aides and things are doing pretty much everything for them, correct? Okay. And 1A is assisted living where they might have stroke issues, they might have physical issues that they can't do, so they can maybe do some things on their own, but they can't do other things, they need assistance for. Am I kind of accurate in that assumption?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And Mr. T was nodding his head affirmatively.
Yeah, I was
also.
kind of addressing to Mr. T, because I think he would know more. Thank you. Okay.
Take the microphone.
Gene's been working for me for 25 years. He actually built Whitehall Manor, so he knows all our personal care. He knows where our activity, he knows as much as I do as far as every square foot of every building we've built over the last 25 years. So he's very experienced.
But the answers to the questions the
Yes.
member of the board asked you, Mr. T, were yes and yes,
Yes.
correct? Okay. Dean, were you involved in the design of Phase 4 at all?
Yes, I was. We did the preliminary design for phase 4.
Okay.
That's a new building.
That's the new building, correct?
Yes.
And on the design, again, did you provide activity space within the confines of the building?
Yes, there is also activity space and dining space in the center of that building,
Okay.
in addition to apartments, because it is independent living.
Correct. Okay.
So, excuse me, another question. You have the activity areas. What consists of in those activity areas? What physically? Is there chairs, tables? What is in those rooms?
I think that's
There are chairs, but they also do, with the elderly people, sometimes they toss balls around, sometimes, they squeeze them between their legs, they sit on balls, they're not, they're older people, who are moving into these assisted living facilities, and activities for them, aren't lifting weights or running on the treadmill. If that were the case, they'd probably wouldn't have moved into an assisted living in the first place. You know, they do basic tasks that, you know, give them coordination and physical and mental activity. Mm-hmm.
With the board, Mr. T,
good,
would you
thank
like to supplement that answer?
No, we're good. We're good, thank you.
Fine, okay. Now, since Mr. Attia decided to pursue his application for coordinated development, Mr. Berg, have you been working with him, with Penn Technology Consulting and with Bill Erdman at Keystone on plans and analyses with respect to parking?
Yes.
Okay. Did you obtain some aerial photographs of the property? And I think, frankly, they're better in the exhibit book than they're going to come up on the screen. And if you would, perhaps just look at the exhibits and tell the board what these exhibits show. Exhibit A8 or Exhibit 8 first, please.
Okay. So the first exhibit, which is
8.
8. That's the one that's up on the one
That's
that's up
right.
on the screen.
That's right.
It shows the collapsed roof of the 4 tennis courts, which is on the footprint of where the Phase 1A
All right, now
was
the
constructed.
my exhibit book, that's not number 8, that's number 9.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Exhibit 8 shows the roof intact. That this is pre-winter of 2014, and it is showing the roof over the 4 tennis courts that it's still intact.
So this is basically the entirety of the West End Racket Swim and Fitness Club in before the date that you just gave us in 2014.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, you can see that there are a total of 6 vaulted roofs in the front portion of the building, which is, they're all still standing. There's a very large vaulted roof in the back that collapsed after this aerial photograph. And there's a pneumatic structure which is inflated over the swimming pool so that, that is protected from the weather. And you can see 11 outdoor tennis courts down in the bottom of the aerial photo.
Okay. Now move on to number 9, please. Exhibit 9.
Okay. Exhibit number 9 here is showing the roof over the rear portion collapsed. This aerial photograph was shot after the winter of 2014 when we had some heavy snows and heavy snowdrift that brought this roof down. This is also before Abe had purchased the property.
That shows the basketball court.
There's the basketball court above the collapsed portion, and we see the collapsed roof. We also see the swimming pool and the baby pool and the outdoor swimming pool there. We see the 6 vaulted roofs in the front, which are the fitness center, which is still standing. And at the bottom, we see 11 outdoor tennis courts, plus the parking close to Route 22.
Let's go to Exhibit 10 now.
This is an aerial photograph that shows the footprint, of where that roof collapsed, but everything is cleaned up in this aerial photo. So where there was previously the collapsed wreckage of the roof, we're now looking at 4 entirely green tennis courts, and those were the indoor tennis courts. This is the area where Phase 1A was constructed, on top of the existing foundations.
And now turn to Exhibit 11 and tell the board what Exhibit 11 shows, please.
Exhibit 11 shows us an aerial photograph of what the site looks like today. And you can see that in the area where the roof had collapsed, where the vaulted roof had collapsed, that is you're looking, at a bird's eye view straight down in the new hip roofs of the Phase 1A and Phase 1B, which is an addition, towards the top of this image.
Okay. Now, this photograph shows that in the area that was once 11 tennis courts, there are now 6 tennis courts and a parking area. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and that's the area, generally speaking, where Phase 4 has been approved for construction.
That is correct, yes.
All right. But again, if you compare all these photographs with respect to I'll call it the fitness building the fitness building today looks just like it did back when the West End Racket Club was operating, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And there shows no changes through these dates. Do you know the date of this latest aerial?
The date of the latest must have been within the past 2 years, I'd say. Yes. Because that was when the construction was completed.
So just as a clarification to me, the gray to your left there, those are tennis courts that are still in existence?
The gray on the far left
I
here,
don't mean
That's
there,
parking lot.
down on the bottom.
where the roofs are. The domes.
Yeah, those are roofs over tennis courts.
Over tennis courts. I
Indoor.
just wanted to be sure what that was. Okay.
Yeah.
And the
That's
black
what- that's- that area-
is the residences of the people that are
They're
next
here,
door. Yeah.
in the
okay.
darker roof. Well, that is out, see out here, there's a big grass area at the top? When Abe opened up Phase 1A and 1B, he removed that swimming pool and filled it in. So we removed some of the amenities of the original fitness center. So that pneumatic structure, it was really a tent that was blown up by blowers, that was removed before Abe purchased the property. The tent was no longer there, and it was like an outdoor swimming pool in the weather. But I think it was more of a liability to Abe to keep that pool there in case someone fell in it and drowned. And so he filled it in and removed it.
Well, that was the outdoor pool
Yes.
that they put a big tent over, and they said you could use it in the winter, but you never could use it, but regardless. Okay, so that's no longer there.
No longer there.
Okay. Because there was never an indoor pool to my recollection.
No.
That's what they claimed was an indoor pool, but it wasn't. Okay.
Okay. All right, Mr. Berg, let's go on to Exhibit 12. Were you aware that in the summer of 2021, Mr. Attia filed a permit application with the township proposing, among other things, to convert the remaining areas of the fitness center to coordinate to use as a fitness center and a restaurant as part of a coordinated development?
Yes.
All right. And although I don't think you prepared the application, is Exhibit 12 the two-page permit application, building zoning permit application that you were provided?
Yes.
Subsequent to the filing, there was a plan that was filed with that application. It's Exhibit A13, the plan that was filed with Exhibit A12.
Yes, it is.
And again, you didn't prepare the plan, but you are familiar with it, right?
Correct. That's the site plan.
Now, Exhibit A14 is a copy of an email from Laura Harrier to Mr. Attia, and you, among other people, were copied. Mr. Erdman was copied. Are you familiar with that email?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that you and Ms. Harrier then subsequently exchanged correspondence back and forth regarding certain aspects of this response letter, her
Yes.
response to the permit application,
Yes.
including parking, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And in that document, and I'm going to paraphrase it, all the board members can certainly take the time to read it if they choose to. It speaks for itself. What Ms. Harrier summarized, the information that would need to be provided for each of the uses that was being proposed as in coordinated development. Is that correct?
That's
Is that
correct.
what you understood?
Yes.
And she cites the sections that may or may not be involved, depending on what Mr. Attia chose to do. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then there were also requests for clarification on the second page of this email. Correct?
That's correct.
Right. I'd like to draw your attention to comments 3 and 4 on the or clarification requests 3 and 4, Mr. Berg. Those relate directly to parking, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And in comment number 3, and again, I'll paraphrase, Harrier indicated that the parking calculations would need to be adjusted for the correct use of, and she puts this in capital letters, capital R recreation, capital S facility, and she suggested that Parkland Manor Fitness was not to be considered low-intensity recreation. Correct?
That's what she says in comment number 3, yes.
All right. And comment number 4 also relates to the parking requirement, in that she states that recreation facility square footage should include the indoor court area, correct?
Yes,
And the parking calculation should be based off square footage.
that's right.
All right, fine. Now, what's significance to you as an architect who, I'm sorry?
I've had a request to take a short break during this period of time.
Fine with us.
Some of our members. So it's now 8:30. How about if we come back at 8:40 or 10 minutes? It'll be just 10 minutes if you don't mind.
That's fine.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry for the interruption.
Not,
All right. We'll have a 10-minute break. We'll return at 8:40.
I'm good, thank you.
gentlemen ready?
Mr. Van Lubeni, I just wanted to let you know the board is going to be cutting off at 10 p.m. And I know one of our board members is not going to be available if this were continued to January, so we would have like a four-member board. Is that an issue for you? The January date would be January 26th. But we don't have we're short one.
I accept all punishment, you know. Just do it.
All right, Gene,
Yes.
I asked you to go to clarification point number 4 in Ms. Harrier's August 3 email. And in that comment or clarification, she states that the recreation facility square footage should include the indoor court area and that parking calculations are based off of square footage. You saw that, right?
Yes, I did.
And without belaboring it, I think you had some dialogue back and forth
Yes.
with her. And eventually the decision was made to file for the variances from the parking criteria and show a plan was reserved parking and then explain why you believe that, or the applicant believes that the actual parking demand will be less than the parking calculated in accordance with the way Ms. Harrier suggested it should be calculated. Is that a fair summary?
That's fair. Yes, that's correct.
All right. All right, now, from the standpoint of calculating parking, Mr. Berg, is the idea of calculating the court square footage as a recreation facility rather than as a court, an issue that makes a large difference in your parking calculation or your parking demand calculation.
Yes, it does make a big difference.
Can you explain to the board what difference it makes?
Okay. The significance is that if you consider it a low-intensity recreation use, then we are calling these courts playing courts, and then you only need 4 parking spaces for each playing court. However, if you consider the area that is in the courts to be a recreation facility rather than the low-intensity recreation, then we need 1 parking space for every 150 square feet of the court area, which makes a significant difference in the number of parking spaces in a given court. We're talking about 4 versus 50 per court.
Now, let's go on for a minute. You
Repeat
mentioned
that again, if you don't
No,
mind.
I'm going to take him through it, and we have an exhibit.
We have an
that shows it.
exhibit that shows that, and you'll see that coming up.
We'll
You'll
get there.
see the calculation.
First of all, Gene,
difference.
is there any mention of the term playing court, tennis court in the definition of recreation facility, which is section 350-48R3?
So that is one of your exhibits also.
Yeah, behind Exhibit 15, for the convenience of the board members, we've attached the 350-48R2, which is recreation low intensity, and 350-48R3, which is recreation facility. Easier than leafing through your book. So, my question was whether or not, Gene, whether or not if I look under recreation facility, there is any specific mention of parking criteria for tennis courts or squash courts or playing courts, as you've used the term on your exhibits.
There's no indication in the parking calculations under the 350-48R3 recreation facility that tells you a parking requirement for playing courts, tennis courts, squash courts, and the like.
All right. And if you look at 350-48R2,
Hold on.
Okay.
I'm looking at page 364, right, in your exhibit, which is Exhibit 15.
well, that's we're
That's
getting
the
to.
low intensity.
That's my next question, all right?
But did you just say that there's nothing in that?
No,
Tennis
so-
courts?
No, I said on page 365.
365?
Yes.
Okay.
That's section 350-48, parentheses R, parentheses 3, recreation facility, which does not contain any parking calculation methods for playing courts, tennis, squash, or the like.
Got it. Thank you.
And the 350-48R3 recreation facility, that is the way that Laura Harrier informed us in her comments, item 3 and 4 in her email, that we needed to consider the entire facility to be a recreation facility by 350-48R3.
All right, I'm confused. It says tennis courts right in there.
Right. I mean, if you're looking at 350-48R4, it's specifically.
R2, you mean?
Excuse me,
R3.
R3. It's specifically defining a recreation facility, and it's including such as fitness clubs. You're talking about a fitness club over there. And, karate. They're also going on, it says, tennis courts.
Outdoor swim clubs and tennis courts.
But okay, it's, and including such things as, so.
Outdoor.
Well, you're calling it a fitness club. So how is this not a fitness club? How is this not you're talking about training equipment or gym equipment. How does this not apply to the
We were not
use
talking about the definition. Attorney Van Lubany was talking about the off-street parking calculation portion of the ordinance.
We're not let me make it clear. We're not arguing with Ms. Harrier tonight. That's not the purpose. What we're trying to show you is that there are a number of ways in which you can call into question whether the parking that's being provided is or is not adequate. We're not arguing with her. In fact, you'll see that that's the starting point that we made as far as the number of parking spaces required. We took everything that she said in her August 3 email, and that's the number we started with. In addendum number 2, it's the number that Gene starts with tonight. What we're showing you is that there, first of all, there's an ambiguity. We submit that there's an ambiguity in the ordinance, which Gene will talk about. Then Mr. Erdman will tell you that there are also some different criteria that engineers utilize to determine parking demand for the low assisted living and for the senior independent living. And when we're finished with that, then we're going to suggest to you that that's why we believe that the actual demand will not be as high as estimated if you take those ordinance requirements and apply them specifically.
Right, and we understand that. I think that's pretty
right.
obvious, but we do want to make the point, at least I do, that in this recreation facility, there is a definition, and in the second line of that definition, it says whether it's indoor or outdoor. So,
All right, but
and there is a parking requirement, a minimum off-street parking calculation that's provided there. Now, I understand your argument that maybe the parking that is specified isn't necessarily what you believe the use will necessitate. But I just wanted to clarify that it does define recreation facility as including indoor or outdoor, and it sounds like the kind of facilities that you are proposing here fall within this recreation facility.
by the same token, a tennis court's a tennis court. So, and what we're pointing out to you, and I'll make the point because the ordinance speaks for itself, if you don't mind, but my question, and I'll ask Gene, in your opinion, Mr. Berg, or not in your opinion, but under the 350-48R2, is there a specific reference to the number of parking spaces required for what is the ordinance describes as a playing court, in parentheses, tennis, squash, or similar?
Yes, there is. In section 350-48R2, the recreation low intensity, 350-48R2, capital D, minimum off-street parking calculations. A minimum of besides the one space for employee on the largest shift, then it says plus 4 spaces for every playing court, parentheses, tennis, squash, or similar. So for it's 4 spaces per playing court. But note that the squash court is, squash is played off the walls. It's an indoor sport court. Squash is an indoor sport court.
Yeah, but pickleball is smaller court with just as many number of people.
We understand that, and that's why.
Yeah.
What we're trying, if I could just give you a fast forward, what we're going to try to show you is a range. We're not going to necessarily argue that you have to accept any of the range. We just want to show you that there are different ways to get to this and different issues that may factor into what the actual parking demand is going to be. That's all we're trying to show you. It's your decision under the ordinance to make the decision on your own. We can't convince you. There's no objective standard. We're just going to try to give you a range. That's
What you're trying to say is that in sometimes something like a tennis court, which really has 4 people but a lot of square footage, may not require as many parking spaces as this is trying to
exactly.
indicate.
That's
to
all
us.
we're showing you. That's right. And we're going to
Okay.
show you a range. That's
All
all.
right.
All right?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Gene, you've pointed out the difference between calculating a tennis court at 1 space for 150 square feet versus 4 spaces total, correct?
Correct. Mhm.
And the average size of the tennis court is what?
Average size of the tennis court,
Or the courts that are in this building, what's the average size?
we have, I can say that, each of the 3 courts contains up to, the highest is 8,457 square feet, which would require up to 57 parking spaces by the zoning ordinance for an indoor playing court with only 4 players. That's the larger courts.
Yeah.
The smaller courts, they calculate out to about 44.
All right.
So there's an average of 50.
All right, so Mr. Berg, when you read that ordinance, did you believe that there was an ambiguity between these 2 sections as to which would apply to a playing court?
Yes, I did.
Let's just leave it there for that point. Okay. Now, there are also, the other thing that I might point out is that in Ms. Harrier's email, again, we're going back now to Exhibit A, I think it's, 14. She also did confirm that on the first page of her exhibit, that the That's the second page. She confirmed that the 15% parking reduction for the coordinated development use would be applicable. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's in section 350-48C11D.
And in her email, it's part of clarification point number 4, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. So you got confirmation of that, and you got the opinion from the zoning officer as to what criteria she wanted you to calculate the parking lot, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
All right.
She wanted us to calculate everything on based on square footage, one person per 150 square feet, regardless of whether we had courts inside.
All right, and under the definition of coordinated development, the reduction depends on the size of the square footage of the facility. In this case, which category are we in? 75,000 or greater?
We're in 75,000 square feet or greater, yes.
All right. Following the receipt of this August 3rd email, did you continue to work with Mr. Attia to develop floor plans for the buildings? In this case, well, you've shown us phase 1A and 1B, but also for the fitness center that's involved here in this application.
Yes.
Okay. And are those floor plans behind tab 16?
Yes, they are. They're after the total chart, which is the total of first and second floor areas. It would be on the sheet A1A.
Yeah. That's a blow up for the convenience of the board of the table that's on the first 2 pages here. I just thought it was a little easier to read. Is that right, Gene?
That's correct.
Yeah, all right. So why don't you go to your floor plans and explain the floor plans. Just take us through quickly. You don't have to spend all night with it. But.
So we can see it on the TV screen, and at the top center, you can see that is the front entrance, which is coming off, the loop driveway in front of the facility, and you enter in the front and the middle into the lobby, and then on the left-hand side, that was where the existing weight room is, which is the existing that's an existing fitness center, and we did not count that as one of the courts. That is in our comparison calculation. Then on the right hand,
Where you park that one at 1 per 150 when the calculations that you're going to show. Parked it at 1 space per 150 square feet in the calculations that you're going to show the board.
Yes, we did. The calculation for the parking requirement for the entire facility that we're here before the board tonight was based upon 1 person per 150 square feet in all of these courts. So there's kind of a central circulation corridor down here, and there are some locker rooms on the side of it and some other fitness areas in there. And then we have these 6 large rectangles that you see on the plan. 5 of them are playing courts, and 1 of them is an existing fitness center, and that's where the ellipticals and the weight equipment are that Abe was describing in his testimony earlier.
All right. But then the other 5 you call playing courts.
The other 5 here are playing courts, yes.
This is the actual floor plan.
That is the actual floor plan, yes.
All right. So when you take square footage measurements, which you did later, you took them off the actual floor plans, correct?
That's correct. I draw polylines around them on CAD, and I list the polylines, and it tells me exactly how many square feet are in each space.
And
All
I'm
right,
sorry,
now
these playing courts are what? Tennis courts, squash courts, what are they?
They're tennis courts. The 4 of these are tennis courts presently, which are at the bottom of the plan. The one which is in the upper left-hand corner, we're going to continue to call it a playing court because it had basketball lines striped out inside it, and they used it for a variety of different sports. But it was still a court. It was just that it was I won't call it a multi-purpose court. I'm going to call it a playing court because that's what it is.
So possibly for basketball, possibly for squash.
Volleyball, basketball, that sort of thing.
Yeah. For all sports that would not be played off the walls, yes.
All right, Gene, could you go to the second page, please? Maybe you already talked about this because this is primarily The second sheet, which is A1B, we've already talked about, that was primarily for phases 1A and 1B, right?
That's for phases 1A and 1B. Realize that the A1A and the A1B pages are just the left and right-hand edges of the plan, because if we had packed all of that onto one piece of paper, it would be so tiny you wouldn't be able to see anything. It would just be a black blob. So you're seeing the left half and the right half, the A1A, A1B, they're both the first floor plan. One's showing the east half with the fitness center, one's showing the west half with phase 1A and phase 1B of the retirement facility.
All right. And the third sheet is A2. What does A2 show?
A2 is the second floor plan of the fitness center, and there are some additional fitness spaces upstairs, but there's not that much square footage up there, just 7,110 square feet.
All right. All right, now, Mr. Berg, that's what exists today. The proposal, Mr. Attia's proposal, is to operate a fitness center and to have a restaurant. Where is the restaurant proposed to be?
So I'm going to go back to the A1A plan, and you'll see at the top of that plan in the upper right-hand corner, and I'm wiggling my mouse on the screen to help you find it. Up in that corner, and I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit because it'll help you see. There are some dashed lines that are surrounding the Parkland Restaurant and Bar. This is the perimeter here. It has its own front entrance that exists, and this is it.
Now
That's 3,607 square feet.
Right, that is all existing space, however, correct?
It's all existing space. It's a licensed premises. We also prepared a separate set of permit drawings for the Parkland Restaurant and Bar, and it already went through the township, and it already received certificate of occupancy approvals, and it has received a liquor license, yes. Based upon these licensed premises, which are the dashed line around the perimeter.
Now, in the submission that was made to the township, there was a document that included, it was actually where most of the information in the application was contained, called addendum number 2. You were involved with me in the preparation of addendum number 2, is that correct?
That is correct.
I apologize, we didn't repeat this one because it was part of the application, all right? The Part A, we had an overview, and then we had a description of the variances. Then Part B was what you called parking analysis per South Whitehall Township, Mr. Berg, correct?
Yes.
Now, do I understand that this was your effort to calculate the total parking required for this facility in accordance with the direction that Ms. Harrier gave you in her August 3 email?
That is correct.
Okay. So you parked the restaurant in accordance with section 350-48R8. You parked all of the space for the fitness center in accordance with the requirement of 350-48R3 recreation facility, in coming up with what we're calling the maximum parking demand for the facility. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And so you came up with, using that technique, if I read your report correctly, you said it calculated to 714 spaces, you took a 15% reduction, and you concluded that without relief from the zoning ordinance, 607 spaces would be required.
That is correct.
Is that what you did?
That is correct.
Okay. And then you did on the next page, the existing, you said provided and proposed for parking. You have existing parking lot, 175 spaces. Now that's based on what's actually out there today.
That's actually out there today. Yes, it is.
Okay. And then you say phase 4 approved parking. That's in accordance with the final plan for phase 4 that is Mr. Attia intends to proceed to develop, correct?
That is correct, yes.
All right. So when that's built, there will be 265 spaces provided.
That's correct,
All right.
yes.
Those be hard surface constructed spaces.
That is correct.
Also submitted with the application was a Plan S2 that showed the reserved parking. That plan is the same one that I had included as Exhibit A6, or Exhibit 6 in our application. And you showed 342 spaces on reserve on that plan, correct?
That is correct. There's 342 reserve spaces. So we end up with more spaces if the reserve are all built. We end up with 613.
So if Mr. Attia were to open the facility and there was inadequate parking, the township has the right to direct him to construct additional parking. That's the way that you understand the reserve parking works. Is that right?
The way it works, yes.
And the plan was prepared because the ordinance requires the applicant to demonstrate that it's feasible to construct those parking spaces.
Yes, that they fit on the site.
Almost finished with you here, Mr. Berg, but I asked you to do one more thing, and that goes back to this issue that we discussed on what difference does the number of spaces for the playing courts make to the analysis overall. Behind Exhibit A17, you prepared this exhibit to demonstrate what the magnitude of that potential difference is. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So the first part of this, you call it parking calculation high and low, but just to be sure, the top half is the calculation using all of the square footage of the building except that which is proposed to be the restaurant as recreational facility, one space per 150 square feet. Is that correct?
Yes, so the parking calculation high, which is shown in the top half of this page, that's showing all of the interior space, both the indoor courts and the fitness area, a total of 71,632 square feet total floor area that is divided by 150, one space for each 150 square feet of the floor area. Yes, 478 spaces. Again, it is the high calculation.
Plus the 2 per employee,
Plus
right?
the 2 per employee.
And if the board goes back and looks at addendum number 2, the narrative we just went through, that's the same 480 spaces that you'll see in that analysis, correct?
That's correct. Same 480 spaces.
Same calculation. Okay. Now, talk about, you've testified one of the existing courts is not a playing court because it's already got fitness equipment in there. That's the way it's
Yes.
set up to be used.
Yes.
So you calculated 5, as shown on your floor plans, 5 playing courts.
5 playing courts.
All right? Now, on the low calculation, you only allocated 4 spaces to each. And we've already talked about the fact that that's a floating number, but you took the low number, 4, correct?
4, that's correct.
Okay? And you subtracted the square footage that comprises those 5 playing courts, correct?
That's correct.
And how many square feet are those playing courts?
The playing courts, they total out to, and that is also on the summary chart,
Right.
which is in our, that was at the beginning of the other floor plans. That number is 38,709 square feet is the square footage of 5 playing courts. In fact, on the top, we show it broken down into 32,923
Right.
and 38,709.
Correct. All right. So more than half of the recreation facility is the 5 playing courts, if you look at strictly on a square footage basis. Is that correct?
Yeah, a little bit more than half.
Well, more than half.
Yep.
Okay.
32,923 square feet versus 38,709 square feet.
But Gene, if you park those tennis courts at 4 per court and park the remaining square footage at 1 per 150 square feet,
Right.
all right, how many parking spaces would be required?
242 parking spaces. That's
right.
the parking calculation low, which is on the bottom of this comparison.
All right. So the comparison, just on that one, using that one differential, is between 480 spaces and you calculated 242. It's about a 50% differential.
Right, yeah, it's
that correct?
238 parking spaces of difference. Yes,
Well, it's basically 50% off, okay? You would agree with that, wouldn't you?
yes.
All right. All right, that concludes my direct examination, Mr. Berg. Yep.
Okay, on addendum two,
Yeah.
page 3. It's just a question, I'm not, I'm just curious about this. When you dealt with the restaurant, when the restaurant was looked at in terms of the number of parking spaces that would be required for that?
Yes.
There are 48 seats in the restaurant?
Yeah, so the way that's
Well,
correct.
Just follow me if you would.
Sure.
48 seats in the restaurant, so that's 16 spaces. But the maximum amount of employees that you're having to take care of 48 people is 4?
4 employees, right?
4. So how does that work?
Well, first of all, that doesn't control anyway, because the way that the ordinance is written
Okay.
is that you have to take the greater of either calculating it based upon 1 space per every 3 seats plus 1 space per employee on the largest shift, or 1 space per 80 square feet of total restaurant floor area. And the 1 space per 80 square feet of total restaurant floor area controls in this calculation. So we do not supply 20 parking spaces. We have 46 parking spaces included for the restaurant.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Thank you.
All right, again, Gene is going to be here. With the board's permission, I'd like to call William Erdman as my third. I'm sorry,
Does the board have any other questions before we move on to the next party?
trying to see if I can hit the 10 o'clock deadline.
Not, then Mr. Bergman then your next witness. He would identify himself again.
If you don't mind, I'll take the mask off.
We do mind.
You do?
Yes, we do.
Okay, sorry. William A. Erdman,
What is your business address, Mr. Erdman?
5012 Medical Center Circle in Allentown, PA.
And what is your occupation?
I'm currently a project engineer,
And by whom are you employed?
Keystone Consulting Engineers,
And how long have you been with Keystone?
37 years.
Okay. What was your work experience prior to moving to Keystone?
Prior to Keystone, I worked at the G. Edwin Pidcock Company for 11 and a half years.
And what is your educational background, Mr. Erdman?
I have a BS in civil engineering, and I completed major coursework for an MS. I never did get the master's, but I completed the major coursework.
And are you a registered professional engineer?
Yes, for 38 years.
In Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Any other states?
No.
Okay. You take a look, please, at Exhibit 18.
You're moving him as an expert?
I am.
Okay, he's
I
accepted.
just was going to have to identify his CV, that's all.
Okay.
All right? Exhibit 18, Mr. Erdman, is that your resume?
Yes, it is.
And did you prepare it?
Yes, I did.
And is all the information in it true, correct, and accurate?
Yes.
You know, I am offering Mr. Erdman as an expert
And again,
professional.
as I said, he's acceptable.
Mr. Erdman, we saw your name on the email, the August 3 email from Ms. Harrier. You must have been involved with Mr. Attia for a while on this project. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. In that regard, did you, in order to provide some background and perhaps answer some questions that we had internally, go back through and familiarize yourself with what I'm going to recall the history of this property and of Mr. Attia's applications since the time he and/or his entities acquired title?
Yes, I did review the files and inventory that information for a historical perspective on everything that's transpired from 2016.
And where did you find that information, Mr. Erdman?
Various sources. I have to extend thanks to Mr. Adams because he provided some of those documents. I found some in my files, but was eventually able to put them all together and have a complete set of everything.
And were you personally familiar with the property when it was operated as the West End Racquetball Swim and Fitness Club?
Yes, very familiar. In fact, my family were members, so I was over there quite a few weekends with the kids in the swimming area.
So you were familiar with the facilities that were there when it was operated as the fitness club?
Yes,
And are you also familiar with the facilities that still exist on the property or have been built since Mr. Attia took over?
yes, not to the extent of Mr. Berg, but I'm familiar with them. I've been through the building.
Well, have you also been on the grounds?
Yes, been on the grounds,
Okay.
yes.
And you've seen the aerial photographs that Mr. Berg
Yes.
identified tonight? Okay. During Mr. Attia's testimony, I made reference to Exhibit 4, which is a copy of, according to the legend, it says overall land development plan, West End Racket, Swim and Fitness Club. Were you the one who obtained a copy of that plan?
I believe I did obtain that, yes.
Okay. And you did you review and compile documentation respecting the various approvals that Mr. Attia received for Parkland Manor, beginning in 2016?
Yes,
Okay. Now, we previously marked as Exhibit 5 the zoning hearing board decision in 2016. In addition to that, let's start, and we'll move through these rather quickly. Exhibit 19, Mr. Erdman, can you identify that exhibit?
I've not committed to memory, so I'll have to.
Who took your?
Oh, okay. There we go. Okay. Exhibit 19 is resolution number 2017-16, adopted on February 1st of 2017.
Okay. And without reading it, because it will speak for itself, this is a resolution granting a waiver of subdivision and land development review, and generally the subject relates to the desire to establish a retirement facility, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Then we go to Exhibit 20. Could you identify it for the record, please?
Yes, Exhibit 20 is resolution number 2018-32, which was adopted by the Board of Commissioners on April 18th of 2018.
Now, what this resolution says right in its title is that it amends Resolution 2017-16, which granted a waiver of land development. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And again, if you read through this, there is no specific plan that is referenced in this resolution, is there?
That is correct.
The subject matter can be obtained, but you can't really understand what exactly what it has to do with as far as planning is concerned.
That is correct.
All right. Let's go to Exhibit 21, please.
Exhibit 21 is Township Resolution number 2019-41, which was adopted on August 21st of 2019.
Now, this is another waiver of subdivision land development review and approval, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in the fifth whereas clause, we have a reference now to a plan, don't we, Mr. Erdman?
That's correct. It indicates a plan dated November 22, 2016, last revised June 24 of 2019.
Now, if we turn to Exhibit, what did I just do? 20, that was 21, right?
Yes.
Okay. We look to the plan behind Exhibit 22. Is that the plan, if you have to have good eyes, but is that in fact the plan that is referenced in Exhibit A21?
Yes.
Now, on this plan, for the first time, we see some kind of updated, I'll call updated information from the West End plan and from the aerial photographs, correct?
That is correct.
All right. And this plan very clearly shows Phase 1, what we've identified as Phase 1, which Mr. Berg said was Phase 1A, And it also, here it talks about under construction being Phase 1A, correct?
That is correct.
So what Mr. Berg in subsequent plans called Phase 1A and 1B, on this plan is Phase 1 and Phase 1A, correct?
That is correct.
All right. And again, from looking at this plan, it shows that a part of the swimming pool area was included in this Phase 1A, as was testified to. The basketball area was being removed. But it looks like the existing parking lot out front stayed the same, correct?
That is correct.
And if you had a magnifying glass, and I know you've done this, and I apologize for not having full size here, but maybe, is it possible to slow that up a little? Let's go over to this parking side. There's a parking tabulation on this plan. Again, without regard to trying to figure out how they may have gotten there, because I believe there may have been a different zoning ordinance in place at the time. Is there an indication, Bill, as to how many parking spaces were required for Phase 1 and Phase 1A?
Phase 1A, if I can read it, I think it was 59 spaces for 1A.
59, I think it says, but,
Yes, 59.
right? And for Phase 1B?
I believe that was 6 spaces for a total of 64.
Total was 64 for the 2 phases, that's correct. And basically, there was no new parking proposed, correct?
That
On
is
this
correct.
plan, all right?
That is correct.
So, as Mr. Attia said, nothing else was happening on the site at that time, and there was a parking lot with 167 spaces in, which had been approved for the racquetball club.
That's
or the
correct.
fitness club. Now, behind tab 23, what is tab 23?
Tab 23 is resolution number 2020-46, adopted by the Board of Commissioners on June 3rd of 2020.
And the subject of this resolution is Parkland Manor Phase 4 Senior Living, is that right?
That is correct.
Now, this resolution is in fact a resolution of a full approval of a subdivision or a land development plan, isn't it?
That is correct.
This is no longer a waiver, as Mr. Attia said,
That is correct.
right? And there are a number of conditions that have to be met before the applicant can proceed. And one of those, if I remember right, well, there's reference to a plan, Mr. Erdman. So if we go to Exhibit A24, is A24 the plan referenced in the resolution?
Yes.
And the highlighted area on that plan, the area that's gray, is the area that was essentially described as Phase 4, correct?
That is correct.
It looks blue when we put it up there, all right.
Right.
Now, again, there is a new parking lot that is required to be developed here in order to meet parking criteria, correct?
Correct.
And that parking lot, as Mr. Berg described, has 90 additional spaces, correct?
That's correct.
All right. That hasn't been built yet, but it's proposed to be built. It
That is
will be
correct.
built.
Will
And
be built.
It must be built under the resolution in order to meet the parking criteria.
Yes.
All right? So at least until we get through Phase 1A, 1A, and 1B, we have the existing parking lot plus the new 90-unit facility, parking lot, which will be there when Phase 4 is built.
Correct.
Correct, okay.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
You say the parking tabulation on Phase 4 is 124 spaces.
That's correct.
Okay, I thought you said 90.
If I could clarify that, 90 are the number of spaces proposed adjacent to the building, 124 the number of required spaces according to the township ordinance.
Okay.
And the balance of those required spaces is in the existing parking facility, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. That's the difference.
Did I answer the question? You still look a little perplexed.
No, I think we get it. You're saying for that Phase 4, the senior living, independent living, there would be 90 parking spaces.
90 new parking spaces.
90 new parking
Right.
spaces. The balance of the parking spaces, you're counting in the ones that are adjacent to Route 22.
That's correct.
That's comprised of how many spaces?
167.
167?
The 167, just so we're clear, Mr. Berg said there are actually 175, but according to the approved plans and the ones that was, on which this was calculated, you go back to Exhibit 4, and you look at the west end parking tabulation, which is in the upper left-hand corner of Exhibit 4. Again, there was a different parking criteria then. This required a total, and you look at the calculation, it required a total of 40, and this was an amendment to the original plan, a total for what is shown there of 167 spaces. There's reference in the note to the fact that there was an additional 42 spaces that were going to be required, and that the applicant would create those spaces by restriping the existing parking lot. So there apparently was a 125 parking space plan, or parking lot. It was restriped at the time the club gave approval to go to this full expanse that's shown on A4 to 167 by restriping. So it's still the same parking lot, but that was the requirement.
And if I could clarify the difference, you are correct, there's a difference between when Mr. Berg testified. There's 167 spaces in the main parking lot. There are also several spaces adjacent to Phase 1A. If you add those to it, you end up with the number that Mr. Berg had testified to. So that's why you're seeing two different numbers. But the existing parking lot contains 167 spaces. The main parking lot, I should say.
And you're saying you're saying there are some additional parking spaces near Phase 1?
If you look next to Phase 1A on the plan, if you can see it, Maria, there's spaces right along.
I see it, okay.
Yeah, if you add those spaces, you come up with the number Mr. Berg testified to.
And I'm sorry, back there behind Phase 1 is how many spaces? Looks like maybe 6?
Seven there. Okay, so there's 7 there, and then the other 2 are next to the restaurant, which would be on the lower corner of the building adjacent to 22. There's 2 more spaces.
We used for the calculation, we used the 167 because that would have to be confirmed later on to be to township's satisfaction that they existed.
But
They
then you come up with a total of 265, is that right, in total?
Can you blow that up, Gene, to see what the total was that you had here? No, the town. Yeah.
That has nothing to do with the existing.
Okay. Total that will exist upon completion of the Phase 4 parking lot. Okay?
So when Phase 4 is completed with the 90 parking spaces constructed, there would be a total of 265 parking spaces on the site. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, Mr. Urban. But first, no, strike that. You were present during Mr. Berg's testimony, correct?
Yes.
And you are familiar with Ms. Harrier's August 3, 2021 email, which was Exhibit A14?
Yes.
Is that correct? And you were present during the discussion or the questioning and answering with Mr. Berg regarding the differential, the mention of the tennis courts, number of spaces in one area of the ordinance, and then the comparison to the recreation facility use where there doesn't seem to be there is no particular parking standard for tennis courts. Now, you read both of those sections also, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And in your professional opinion, is there an ambiguity between those two sections?
Yes, in fact, Mr. Berg and I spent an extensive amount of time discussing those two sections and both came to the same conclusion. There is an ambiguity between those two sections.
Let's go on to a different subject. As a professional engineer, Mr. Erdman, is there one publication that is generally accepted in the engineering profession that is consulted when you need to make an estimate regarding the anticipated parking demand for a land use,
Yes,
other than a local zoning ordinance?
yes,
Okay. And you would agree with me that in your experience, local zoning ordinances often have, I'll just say, varying parking requirements for the same land use?
yes.
What is the publication that you look at when you want to get an opinion as to what the real parking demand for use may be?
It's called the ITE Parking Generation Manual, ITE standing for International Transportation Engineers. It's a document that's compiled by engineers throughout the entire country based on numerous studies to come up with analyses of required parking spaces.
This is a document that Keystone has a copy of,
Yes,
that you consult,
Yes.
and others in your firm consult on a regular basis, correct?
yes,
And in fact, when parking studies are submitted to agencies such as the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, that's the parking demand figure that PennDOT requires that you utilize, isn't it?
yes, I'm sure that would be
They
their
require
guideline.
the ITE manual to be used. Okay.
That's correct.
All right. Now, in this case, I think you're familiar with the section of the zoning ordinance that grants the zoning hearing board the authority to grant a variance with respect to parking requirements where the applicant can demonstrate that meeting a parking requirement would result in unneeded parking, called excess parking.
Yes, I've read that and I'm familiar with
Okay.
it.
Did you review the ITE manual to determine whether there were parking demand studies for assisted living use and for senior independent housing use?
Yes,
Okay. And are there criteria for those uses?
yes, there are.
Okay. According to the ITE manual, what is now, explain a little bit to the board in case they probably heard this before, but the ITE collects parking studies from actual projects around the country, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And then they assign a particular use classification to the project that they study, correct?
That is correct.
And then they take that information, for example, if they had 10 studies relating to a Wawa convenience store, then they would create a criteria for that use. They provide the average parking demand at different times of day. Is that essentially correct?
Yes, in addition, they provided on the basis of different independent variables.
Okay, all right. If we were to consult the ITE manual for the parking requirement for an assisted living residence, what is the parking demand, the average parking demand for assisted living?
It's 0.4 spaces per unit.
And is a unit same as a room?
Yes,
Okay. Mr. Atiyah testified that he had, I think he said 59 assisted living rooms. If you apply the ITE criteria to those 59 rooms, how many parking spaces would ITE suggest the parking demand would be?
24.
Okay. Now, Mr. Atiyah said he went by today and there was only 12 or 13 cars, but okay, 24 would be the ITE criteria.
Yes,
Now, the township, how many spaces, let's refresh our recollections, how many spaces were required by the township for phases 1A and 1B?
64.
Okay. So that's a difference of 40 right there, of a variable, a range.
That is correct.
All right. Phase 4 is proposed to be senior independent housing. According to the ITE manual, first of all, is there a requirement for that type of housing?
Yes,
Okay. And according to the manual, how many parking spaces would be required for the proposed 80 senior adult housing units? Or what would be the anticipated parking demand? That's a better way of saying it.
49.
49 spaces. And I think we confirmed earlier that the township required 124 spaces for the same 80 units,
That is correct.
correct? All right, and that is a difference of 75 spaces or 70?
73.
Thank you.
75, excuse me, 75.
Okay, okay. So then if the township said, well, go ahead, or the zoning hearing board said, well, parking in accordance with ITE makes some sense, at least until we prove that it's not sufficient, What's the difference between, as far as phase 1A, 1B, and 4 would be, by parking in accordance with ITE criteria versus the parking required by the township?
If you compare the totals between the two uses, the township ordinance would require 188. The ITE criteria would require 73, so there's a net of 115 spaces required over and above within the township ordinance.
So again, that's a range. I mean,
Yes.
with some data that you consider to be, as a professional engineer, reliable, the type of information that you and other professional engineers regularly rely on in determining parking demand.
Yes, as well as my observations of parking lots in these facilities, just as was mentioned earlier, the few cars that Mr. Attia spotted in that parking lot. The numbers that I'm seeing here, to me, are perfectly reasonable.
All right. So Mr. Berg said, well, the range, there's as many as 238 ranging in the reduction differential between his high and low, the number calculated by Ms. Harrier for the fitness center of this use, and you're suggesting as many as 115 spaces range again, correct?
Yes.
Between high and low as far as the assisted living and senior independent housing is concerned?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you add those two numbers together, we're talking about a potential differential in parking demand of 315 spaces then, if I did my arithmetic correct.
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Erdman, did you review the, by the way, if you turn to Exhibit A25, Mr. Erdman, that's the last page in our book. Did you prepare Exhibit A25?
Yes, I did.
And does that just summarize what the IT manual tells us as far as anticipated parking demand for the two uses?
Yes, it actually provides the ITE parking demand as well as the township parking demand with summaries indicating the difference between them.
Essentially a summary of the testimony you've just provided.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you're familiar with the plan A6 that showed the location at which reserved parking was being proposed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Have you visited the property to observe those areas which are identified as being potential sites for reserved parking?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Based on your personal observation of those areas and your professional opinion, are those areas readily adaptable for use as parking facilities if the Board of Commissioners determined that it was necessary in order to satisfy parking demand?
Yes, I did field view those areas, and in my opinion, they are reasonable, provided, of course, that the necessary approvals and permits are obtained.
Now, Mr. Erdman, I think we talked about the existing parking lot. You've seen that. You saw that when it was a fitness club. The existing parking lot in front of the building really hasn't changed, has it?
It is not.
Okay. And one of the variances that are being requested here that is a variance from section 350-4802E, Roman numeral, small Roman numeral 3, small a, 7, which requires planting islands, arguably would require planting islands in the existing parking lot. In your opinion, is the existing parking lot non-conforming with respect to that requirement?
Yes.
Okay. And on all your review of all your different approvals, the plans the township has approved, they've never asked to have parking islands constructed in that parking facility, have they?
No, not that I observed in any of the documents.
All right. And we're not proposing it in connection with this application either, correct?
No, we are not.
All right. Another variance that we identified in an abundance of caution is a variance that requires parking islands and parking lots, or the parking that requires, that's 350-4802E3A8, that requires that parking lots in excess of 30,000 square feet be provided with curbing, planting strips, and pedestrian walkways. And again, those are absent from this parking facility. Is that correct?
That is correct. The only curbing and open areas are in the front of the building where the turnaround is.
But not throughout the parking lot?
Not throughout the parking lot, no.
And again, in your opinion, is that a non-conforming condition with respect to that section of the ordinance?
Yes.
Okay. And again, if you had to do that, if you had to add those improvements, that would reduce the number of actual parking spaces provided, correct?
Yes,
Okay. It would increase impervious surface because you would have to add additional parking spaces someplace else on the site. Is that correct?
yes,
Okay. And the same is true of the reserved parking areas, isn't it? And if we add a lot of extra parking, you have to provide the stormwater management that goes with that. You create additional impervious surface. In your professional opinion, is there any good reason that you can think of to build more parking for a project than is required, or than is actually needed?
I certainly wouldn't recommend building it now, but with the ability to build it later, recognizing that can be done if needed.
And has Mr. Attia authorized you to proceed to obtain your NPDES permit so that he has it when he needs it?
Yes, we've actually discussed that, and he's asked us to proceed. As everybody knows, NPDES permits have a tremendously long lead time, so the sooner we get started on it, the better.
And then that would be in your back pocket, or Mr. Attia's back pocket, as the case might be, in the event that he develops and uses this facility as he proposes, and it turns out that the actual parking demand is more than we actually think it's going to be. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'm
That
sorry,
concludes my-
can I follow up on that? For the NPDES permit, did you say you did apply for that?
No, we've discussed it, and Mr. Attia is authorized to proceed with it.
To proceed with applying for that?
Proceed with the
We
application.
don't have
for
it
the
in
permit.
hand today.
I'm sorry, what?
We do not have the permit in hand, but we will be proceeding so that we're in a position to
And should
build.
you have to implement
Yes.
it, you could put in the reserved parking
Correct.
spaces?
Yeah, one of the...
Let me ask you this. What is the length of, or the term of that permit? Because let's say it's like, assuming everything was approved or something. I mean, does that permit have a life of 5 years?
Yes,
Yeah.
5 years is your
5
answer.
years, okay.
From the date of permit issuance, so as we sit here now, if it takes 6 months to a year, it's probably 5.5 to 6 years.
Ms. Mulaney, one of the things that I've done in
Okay,
other,
and what happens then, let's say that 5-year time period has come and gone, the commissioners have not required, assuming everything was approved, for the reserved parking spaces to be put in, is there like a reauthorization, is there a renewal, or do you have to start over again?
my suggestion, and I've done this in other townships, is that the condition is such that the township can give the client a direct to put the parking in or provide us with an extension of the NPDES permit. So that if we then give you another 5 years, and the township can keep control so that it always has the ability to say, put the parking in.
But procedurally, what happens, to answer your question, Marie, is you are supposed to apply for the new permit within a 6-month window prior to the expiration. And then you begin the process. You do not have to start necessarily from scratch, but I'll qualify that by saying if the regulations have changed, and I know a number of developers got caught up in that years ago, you then have to comply with the current regulations. But within that 6-month window, you're to apply. If you apply for it and it happens to expire at the end of 5 years, it continues until they issue the new permit. But you definitely want to apply within that 6-month window, because that protects you under the existing permit if they don't issue the new permit.
And that's really a protection for the property owner, more so than even, for example, the township, because then that would probably require him to do the new requirements, should they update the requirements, which, as we know, that always seems to happen anyway.
That's right, and that also protects the township. I mean,
Well, obviously, of
Yeah.
course, of course. But, you know, in terms of the homeowner, the property owner, rather, having to do perhaps even more.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, as a professional advising Mr. Attia, I would definitely not allow him to let that permit lapse,
Collapse, right.
because that could be a major problem down the road if you have to start over and apply for a new permit. So
Have another
as we
question.
sit here, I'd make sure to advise him, we should now renew that permit to make sure it stays in place.
I have another question for you. You had indicated if you had to upgrade I'm going to call it the Route 22 parking area. If you had to upgrade that with the planners and the requirements, you said you would lose parking spaces. How many spaces would you lose?
I was afraid you're going to ask that question because it's difficult to answer, simply because when you put the islands in, it really messes up the alignment of the parking spaces. So you can't just look at it and say, this island will eliminate 2 spaces. it could have a ripple effect across the parking lot to the next island, so instead of it being 2, it might be 5 spaces. So it's difficult to answer, but there's absolutely no question you would lose parking spaces. Given the size of that parking lot, I'll take a wild guess that it's probably between 25 and 50 spaces, but I admit that's a large range. Until you actually sit down and lay it out, it's tough to give a definitive answer.
Now, I know you're referring to the parking areas being non-conforming, but strangely enough, when I look back at prior zoning ordinances, those same requirements are in there.
I understand that. That's why I said somebody's approved it. They approved it for the racket club. They approved it. I don't know. I don't have the history of the fitness club. We don't have anything further back than this land development plan. So I can't tell you how it got there. It is very clear that how they calculated parking, whether that was or wasn't in the accordance with the ordinance, I don't know. I don't know whether you would know the zoning ordinance better than I. A lot of times those things are in subdivision ordinances. Yours happens to be in the zoning ordinance now. I don't know whether it always has been. I know that. I agree with you.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Could you pick that up, what I was saying? Please don't ask me to repeat it. You know, I'm seeing those same provisions in prior ordinances, including an ordinance book that I have that goes back to 1974.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if that specific requirement was in the 1974 one because it was obviously amended in 77, but I can tell you, I did find it in the zoning ordinance from 1974, but it was amended in 77 and 91. I did find it in the zoning ordinance from 2012. So I know you're using the word non-conforming.
I am, but I could also use different words.
And you're using it very loosely because, and it would be your burden to prove that it's non-conforming. So I think I'd rather that you use the phrase non-compliant.
Well, I think we could also argue that that we asked for the variance because it wasn't real clear. We couldn't go back and trace the history to figure out how it got there.
Right.
What we can see is it's going through the racket club originally, went through phase 1, waiver of land development, but the permits were issued and it's been built. The same with phase 1A, and now the final approval for phase 4. So I guess the other argument I was thinking, if I talk in variance terms, I would argue that the property owner has acquired variance by estoppel, vested right, whatever you want to say. But yeah, we don't have to call it non-conforming. We can take our choice, because I have asked for the variance. I'm not
Or perhaps they even got some variance relief somewhere along the line that we don't know. But we saw that too. I mean, I did see that in that 1996 plan, that again, they're showing those parking spaces abutting Route 22. How exactly it got there without the requirement of curbing and the other items, who knows?
Well, that's where I am. That's why I'm asking for variances essentially without trying to argue the non-conformity issue, I think.
Well, that it's an existing condition, how it got to be that way.
That's right.
Is anybody's guess, I guess, at this point. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
The other question I have for Mr. Erdman, you had mentioned that back referenced the original plan to the racquetball club.
Yes.
And you said there was 174 spaces that required, there was 125 existing, so they had to make 167 spaces.
Well, they made 167 spaces by reconfiguring the parking lot.
Right. Are those spaces now size-wise compliant with today's standards? Or are they, what's the size of them?
I honestly can't tell you if they're compliant. I can tell you, having parked in those spaces, that they're not very tight spaces, so they're reasonably close. But to say they're exactly according to the current ordinance, I did not check that. But they're not real narrow spaces, if that's your question. I know in some cases with existing parking lots, there's exceptionally narrow spaces. But if they're supposed to be 10, maybe they're only 9. But I just can't answer your question because I didn't research it.
Thank you.
Are there any Is there any curbing for the row of parking spaces that are closest to Route 22? Nothing? Is there nothing there to stop a car from rolling off the property?
There is a fence along there, but as to the question as to whether there's bumper blocks or curbing, I think the answer is no. The only curbing I can picture is around the island in front of the building and actually the curbing along the sidewalk. I don't believe there's any curbing throughout the rest of the parking lot, particularly on the periphery.
There's nothing there.
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Would there be any consideration to putting something there? Stop cars from rolling off the property?
We could discuss that with Mr. Attia. I can't answer because there's a cost involved, but we could certainly discuss that with him if that's something that the board would like us to consider.
I assume he's coming back, so
I'm sorry, what?
I assume Mr. Attia is coming back. I can't.
Oh, here he comes.
There's never been curbing on the property, and then there's a fence, a 10-foot fence.
And there might be a differential height there too, so I honestly don't have a mental picture of that, but if it's higher,
On the other side of the fence, so it's like, it's level, you're not going downhill.
but even if the grade adjacent to the parking lot is just up by 6 or 8 inches before it drops off. Bumper blocks. Yeah.
Snow removal is a headache.
Yeah, the only thing I'd request there is if that's going to be a condition to ask us to study it and determine what's needed in case it's already acceptable. Because if we're required to put the bumper blocks or curbing in and it serves no purpose, then I would submit that we should evaluate, determine whether it's a safe condition, and if it's not a problem, then it remains as it is. Just a
Well, then
request.
review it. When you come back, you let us know. If it needs it, you need it. If you don't need it, you don't need it.
Yeah.
I thought I recalled there was a little ravine there that it drops down into, but before it gets on 22, but I might be wrong.
There's a little, on the spots next to the BMW, okay, there's a little swale there. Area, but
Yeah.
a little swale where the storm water is passing through.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of, right?
Bottom line
That
is,
all goes to saying if there may be a reason or not a reason.
you know, I don't think we want to make it an argument. If the board feels that's a good idea, Mr. Attia will accept the condition.
Okay.
I have no further questions.
And if I could just add one comment to that, curb stops rather than curbing, because if you put curbing in, you create drainage issues. With the curb stops, the drainage can run around them, so we don't want to impact the drainage on that parking lot by blocking it off with solid curbing.
Seeing none? Is there anything else you'd like to present now?
Just, I'm not going to make a closing. I think I've made in the opening, I've said we understand that this is an issue for the board to determine based on the testimony. We can't dictate to you. I do want to hand up one, I'll call it a summary of the testimony, my best case, if you would, please. And I've just summarized it. It's not evidence. It's based on the evidence.
Would you like us to mark it as an exhibit? I understand its argument, but would you like us to mark it as an exhibit?
I'd be happy to have it marked as an exhibit. That would be fine.
That would be 26.
I'm not offering it as new testimony. I'm offering it as a summary of the testimony that's been provided.
That would be Exhibit 26?
Yes.
I've got more. I have more. What I did here, just in 60 seconds or less, for the assisted living, it already exists. I took Bill's testimony and took the number of spaces for the assisted living that would be required if he used ITE rather than the zoning ordinance requirement. For the restaurant, I used the ordinance requirement. We offered no suggestion that that was incorrect, and we're not arguing over that one. For the fitness club, I put the number that was required for the whole kit and caboodle, all the tennis courts, the outdoor courts, the indoor courts, the swimming pool, everything. That was 167. That's the plan that we marked as Exhibit A, Exhibit 4. And we know that the club is no longer that big, but I said, okay, if 167 was enough for all of that, it's probably enough for what we have left. So that's the assumption that I made there. I added those parking spaces up and I got to 286, right? Now, with respect to, I think we get 15% off, just like Mr. Berg did on his maximum calc. That takes us down to 244 required. And you'll recall the testimony that when we build the next 90 spaces for phase 4, we're going to have 265 spaces, which would exceed what I'll call the low end requirement. So it's somewhere in between, probably, but we show we have enough to cover that complete differential in the reserve parking.
I do have one question for Bill real quick. Relating to the ITE numbers, like for the assisted living, I mean, it's quite a difference between 64 from the ordinance to 24. Is the formula that the township uses, is that common in the area, or is the ITE, is it somewhere in between? Does it seem like our ordinance is way and above from others, not just the ITE? Do you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying, Ken. I've not researched other ordinances, but from my perspective, it's not that unusual to find fairly big differences between zoning ordinance requirements and ITE. But did I research others to say it's in the ballpark? I honestly have not.
Okay. Okay, that was it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your courtesy. I'd like to move my exhibits.
Your exhibits are accepted.
Thank you.
Well, the board will meet in executive session. I don't think we're going to be able to give you a determination this evening.
Before we do that, I just wanted, was there anything that either the zoning officer, Laura Harrier, or the planner, Greg Adams, wanted to present or submit or have any questions? You're good? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Did the board want to go into executive session?
I guess we could. I mean, we are going to leave at 10 o'clock regardless. Well, let's go into executive session and we'll come back out and see where we are. Right now, the meeting will be adjourned until we return.
Thank you. Have a great holiday, folks.
I think you should wait.
I think we should, yeah, I think we should.